Hey there, so I'm going to do a really quick video explaining how we got our answers to problems 1 through 10 when adding fractions with unlike denominators. Alright, so let's look at number 1. I have 6/10 plus 1/2. As we can see, I have different denominators, so before I can add anything, I have to make a common denominator on the bottom, so the same number on the bottom. So I already know 10 would be a great common denominator, so I need to ask myself, what can I multiply by 2 to get 10? 2 times 5 is going to give me 10, and what I do to the bottom, I do the top. So I've got to multiply by 5 on top as well. So let's see what that would look like. 1 times 5 is going to give me 5 as my new numerator. 2 times 5 is going to give me 10. So 5/10 would be one of my fractions. Then I can go ahead and add it to the original fraction of 6/10. So we have 6/10 plus 5/10. When I add across the top, 6 plus 5 gives me 11. Then for the denominator, when I add fractions, your common denominator is going to stay the same. So I end up with 11 over 10. But this is not in simplest form. It is still an improper fraction because I have a larger number in the numerator and a smaller number in the denominator. So I'm simply going to divide the bottom into the top, or I could write it out as 10 goes into 11. How many times? It goes in one whole time, so 1 times 10 is 10. I'm going to subtract, and I get 1 as my remainder. So this 1 whole becomes the 1 whole here, and this 1 remainder becomes my new numerator. So I have 1 over 10, and the denominator stayed the same. So 1 and 1/10 would be the answer to number 1. For number 2, I have 1/5 plus 4/8. What I did was ask myself, what number could be a common denominator that both 5 and 8 could go into? Well, the answer here would be 40. So I could multiply 5 times 8 because that would give me 40. And what I do the bottom, I do the top. So I'm going to multiply 1 times 8, which gives me 8 as my new fraction. So I have 8/40. Then I have to change this one as well. So I need to ask, what number can I multiply by 8 to get 40? So I could do 8 times 5 is 40. What I do the bottom, I do the top. So I multiply 4 times 5 as well. So I would get 20 over 40. Remember, I simply add the numerators. So 8 plus 20 gives me 28. And the denominator here is going to stay the same, so 28 over 40. But this is not in simplest terms, so I'm going to see, is there a factor bigger than 1 that can go into both 28 and 40 equally? Well, yes. I could divide by 4 from the numerator and from the denominator. So 28 divided by 4 gives me 7, and 40 divided by 4 gives me 10. So 7/10 would be my answer in simplest form. All right, now I have 1/2 plus 6/11. So what could be a common denominator? If I'm not sure, I could always multiply the opposite denominator by the other denominator and end up with a common denominator that way. So I could take 2 and multiply it by the 11. So 2 times 11 gives me a denominator of 22. What I do at the bottom, I do the top. So I'm going to multiply by 11. 1 times 11 gives me 11. So I now have 11 over 22. I'm going to do the opposite here so I can get my answer of 22 as a common denominator. So I'm going to multiply 11 by 2, which was the other denominator. What I do the bottom, I do the top, so I'm going to multiply by 2 as well. So 6 times 2 gives me 12, and 11 times 2 gives me 22. This allowed me to have a common denominator, so it's the same number on the bottom, and I can go ahead and add the numerators. 11 plus 12 gives me 23, and 22 is going to remain the same. So what I have to look at next is to see if this is in simplest form. Well, once again, is improper fraction. So I have a larger number in the numerator and a smaller number in the denominator. Okay, so what I have to do to make this a fraction that's proper and in simplest form, I need to divide the bottom into the top. So once again, I could write it out as 22 goes into 23 one whole time. So 1 times 22 is 22, subtract with 1 left over. So I have my 1 whole that it went into evenly. Then I have a remainder of 1 out of the original 22. because the denominator stayed the same. So 1 and 1/22. All right, for number 4, we had 4/6 plus 5/7. What I did was make a common denominator of 42. And remember, whatever I multiply by the bottom to get 42, I also have to multiply by the top. So I multiplied by 7 on the bottom, by 7 on the top. I ended up with 28 over 42 for the first fraction. For the second fraction, I still had to get a common denominator of 42. So I multiplied by 6 to do 7 times 6 gives me 42. What I do the bottom, I do the top. So 5 times 6 gave me 30. So now I have 28 42nds plus 30 42nds, which gives me 58 over 42. I'm going to divide the bottom into the top because it's improper, and 42 will go into 58 one whole time. There's going to be 16 left over as the remainder out of 42 as the denominator. But I do need to go ahead and reduce those because there is a common factor that can go into both the numerator and the denominator evenly. I'm going to divide them by 2. So I end up getting 1 whole still, so that carried over. And then 16 divided by 2 is 8, and 42 divided by 2 is 21. So 1 and 8 over 21. All right, halfway through, we're at problem number 5. I have 3/8 plus 2/9. So I decided to use a common denominator of 72 because both 8 and 9 can go into it. So I multiplied 8 times 9 to give me 72. Why did I do the bottom? I do the top. So times 9, I get 27 over 72. Plus, I also have to convert this fraction to a common denominator of 72. So I have to think, what number times 9 gives me 72? Well, I'm going to multiply by 8. So 9 times 8 is 72. Why did I do the bottom? I do the top. 2 times 8 is 16. I'm going to go ahead and add across the top to get 43. And then I'm going to keep the denominator the same, which is 72. So 43 over 72. All right, for number 6, I have 6/10 plus 1/2. I decided to make a common denominator of 10 because I already had that number here. So I just had to multiply by 5 on the bottom and multiply by 5 on the top from this fraction to get 5/10. Now I can add that to the original 8/10, and I would end up with 13 over 10. Once again, this is improper, which means I have a larger number in the numerator and a smaller number in the denominator. So to make it a proper fraction, I have to divide the bottom into the top. So once again, we're going to write that out. So we're going to do 10 into 13. It goes 1 whole time. 1 times 10 is 10. This time I'm going to have a leftover amount of 3. So my 1 whole is going to be the 1 whole we see here. Then I have a fractional amount. I have a leftover of 3, so that's going to be the numerator, out of 10, which was the original denominator. So 1 and 3/10. All right, number 7, I have 4/9 plus 7/8. I decided to use 72 again because both factors can go into 72. So after I multiplied by my number 8, 9 times 8 is 72, 4 times 8 is 32. I get 32 over 72 plus 7 times 9 is 63. And 8 times 9 is 72. Because what I do the bottom, I do the top, so I multiplied both by 9. I got my common denominator of 72. I'm just going to add across the top now. So once I did, I got 95 over 72. Finally, I'm going to divide the bottom into the top. When I did that to get a mixed number, I have 1 whole because 72 went into 95 1 whole time. I had 23 left over as my numerator over the original number, which was 72 as the denominator. So I have 1 and 23 over 72. All right, for this one, I have 3/6 plus 3/6. They already have a common denominator, so I simply had to add across the top. 3 plus 3 was 6. The denominator stayed the same. So when I divide the bottom into the top, I could reduce that down to 1 whole because this was also considered an improper fraction, since the numerator was the same number as the denominator instead of being a smaller number on top. So I divided 6 into 6. It went 1 whole time. 1 times 6 was 6. There was 0 left over, so that 1 whole became my answer. All right, for number 9, we have 1/2 plus 11/12. I decided to use 12 as a common denominator, so I had to multiply by 6 to get there. 2 times 6 was 12. What I do the bottom, I do the top. 1 times 6 is 6. So now I can go ahead and add it to the original fraction, 11/12. And when I go across the top adding, I get 6 plus 11 is 17. Then I have 12 on the bottom. It's going to stay the same because remember, when you add, denominators stay the same. This is improper, so we could change it to a proper fraction by dividing the denominator into the numerator. So I'm going to do 12 goes into 17 one whole time. 1 times 12 is 12. Then I'm going to subtract. I get 5 left over. So I have my 1 whole, which we see here. Then I'm going to take the leftover remainder. That's going to be the new numerator. And then this denominator stays the same, 12. So 1 5/12. All right, last problem. We have 4/12 plus 1/2. I'm going to go ahead and use 12 again as the denominator because I already know that 2 can go evenly into 12. So how did I make this 2 into a 12? Well, I multiply by 6. 2 times 6 gave me 12. What do I do the bottom? I do the top. 1 times 6 gives me 6. So now I can add the original fraction, which was 4/12 from here, added to the new fraction 6/12 because they have a common denominator of 12. So let's add across the top. 4 plus 6 gives me 10. 12 is going to remain the same. Okay, now this is a possible answer, but it's not in simplest terms because I can ask, is there a factor that can go evenly into 10 and 12? Well, yes, since both numbers are even, I can divide by 2. So I'm going to divide 2 on top and divide by 2 on the bottom, and I get an answer of 5/6 because 10 divided by 2 is 5 and 12 divided by 2 is 6. All right, so there were several steps to get through this. The main thing to remember, though, is you have to have a common denominator on the bottom before you can add. So after I found that common denominator, I simply add across the top to get my answer, and then it has to be in simplest form. Okay, thank you so much, and have a great day. Bye-bye.